The crimson sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets of Copper Creek as Liliana Hargrove clung to life in a stranger's arms. Blood from her shoulder wound seeped through the makeshift bandage, her vision blurring as she gazed up at the rugged face of the man who had pulled her from the wreckage of the stagecoach. 1876 had brought nothing but misfortune since she'd left Boston, and now this bandit's death and a handsome rescuer whose name she didn't even know. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice as rough as the Wyoming terrain surrounding them. "You're safe." His weathered hands worked quickly to stem the bleeding as he carried her toward the town's only doctor. "Thomas," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, have you seen him?" "My husband, he was in the coach with me." The stranger's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, madam." "The other passenger." His voice trailed off, unable to finish the grim news. "No," Liliana gasped, struggling against his hold. "He can't be. We only just arrived out west. We were starting a new life." The man held her firmly as her strength gave way to grief. "The bandits took aim at your coach. I saw it happen from the ridge. By the time I got there." He shook his head. "I'm truly sorry." 3 weeks later, Liliana stood at the freshly dug grave on the outskirts of town, the pain in her shoulder nothing compared to the ache in her heart. Thomas Hargrove had been her husband of just 6 months. She'd left everything behind in Boston to follow him west, where he'd promised to build them a prosperous life. Now she stood alone, a widow at 23 in a town where she knew no one, Mrs. Hargrove. The deep voice behind her was now familiar. She turned to find Hayes Vance, the man who had saved her life that terrible day. In the weeks since the attack, he'd checked on her recovery regularly, bringing supplies and ensuring she had what she needed while she healed at the town's small boarding house. "Mr. Vance," she acknowledged with a small nod. "I didn't expect to see you today." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. His blue eyes held a steadiness that had become a source of comfort to her. "I wanted to pay my respects," he said, placing a single wildflower on the grave, "and to see how you're faring." "As well as can be expected," she replied, pulling her shawl tighter despite the warm spring air. "The doctor says I'm healing nicely." Hayes nodded, seeming to wrestle with something unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "I've been thinking about your situation, Mrs. Hargrove. With no family here and winter still months away, you have time to return east if that's your wish." Liliana gazed across the vast landscape. The idea of returning to Boston as a widow, to face the pitying looks of friends and the disappointed sighs of her parents who had opposed the marriage, made her stomach turn. "I have nothing to go back to," she admitted. "Thomas and I sold everything. What little we had was lost in the attack." "What did he bring you out here for?" Hayes asked, his tone gentle. "He had plans to start a small newspaper," she explained. "He was a writer back east. I was to help with the typesetting. We had a printing press ordered to arrive next month." She smiled sadly. "He was so full of dreams." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, then placed his hat back on his head. "Mrs. Hargrove, I don't mean to be forward, but I have a proposition for you." Liliana's eyebrows raised slightly, but she remained silent. "I own the largest cattle ranch outside of town. It's a good business, but it keeps me too busy to maintain the house proper. I'm in need of someone to cook, clean, and generally keep things in order. It would be honest work with fair pay, your own room, and my protection." "Your protection?" she asked, confused. Hayes's expression grew serious. "The men who attacked your coach weren't ordinary bandits. They're part of a gang that's been terrorizing this territory for months. They're known for leaving no witnesses." His voice lowered. "You're the only person who's seen their faces and lived to tell about it." Fear gripped her heart. "Are you saying they might come looking for me?" It's possible, which is why staying in town alone isn't safe. He shifted his weight. At my ranch, you'd be surrounded by ranch hands who are all handy with a gun. No one would get to you there. Liliana stared at the grave of her husband, considering the cowboy's words. Why would you do this for me, Mr. Vance? You don't even know me. Hayes looked away, across the rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I was there when your husband took his last breath, madam. He pulled me close and told me you were in the coach. His last words were a plea for me to save you. Tears filled her eyes as Hayes continued. The woman said, "He died saving me," Hayes recounted. The coach was overturning, and he pushed you toward the door, shielding you from the worst of it. That's what you told the doctor when you were feverish. Liliana nodded, remembering Thomas's final act of love pushing her toward safety as bullets splintered the wood around them. Then I'll keep you safe for him, Hayes said firmly. I made a promise to a dying man, and I aim to keep it. Liliana wiped away her tears, studying the cowboy before her. There was something honorable about him, something steadfast that reminded her of her father's stories about the soldiers he'd fought alongside during the war. I accept your offer, Mr. Vance, she finally said, but only until I find my footing. I won't be dependent on charity forever. It's not charity, Mrs. Hargrove, he corrected. It's a job, and from the looks of those bandages, I'd say you need one. She managed a small smile. When do I start? As soon as the doctor says you can travel. The ranch is a half-day's ride from town. 2 days later, Liliana found herself seated beside Hayes in a wagon loaded with supplies. Her few possessions were packed in a small trunk, and the doctor had given his reluctant approval for her to leave, provided she continued to rest her injured shoulder. The journey to the Vance ranch gave her time to observe her new employer. Hayes was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was with purpose. She learned he had come west after the war, working as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy his own land. He was unmarried, had no family to speak of, and had built his ranch from nothing over the past decade. "How many men work for you?" she asked as they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling valley below. 8 full-time hands, more during roundup and branding season, he replied. Good men, all of them. They bunk in the bunkhouse about 100 yards from the main house. And the main house, that's where I'll be working, Hayes nodded. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid. 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, a parlor that I hardly use. There's a room for you on the opposite side from mine, so you'll have your privacy. The propriety of the arrangement hadn't occurred to Liliana until that moment. As a widow living under the roof of an unmarried man, there would be talk. People will gossip, she said quietly. Hayes glanced at her, then returned his eyes to the trail. People always do, but my men know I keep my word and expect them to keep theirs. You'll be treated with respect on my land. As they approached the ranch, Liliana was surprised by the beauty of it. The main house was larger than she expected, built of sturdy logs with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. A barn, corral, and bunkhouse formed a loose semicircle nearby, with cattle grazing on the lush grass beyond. In the distance, mountains rose majestically against the sky. It's lovely, she breathed. Hayes looked pleased. It's home. The next several weeks passed in a blur as Liliana adjusted to her new role. The work was hard but satisfying, cooking for Hayes and occasionally for the ranch hands when they worked late, keeping the house clean, mending clothes, and tending to a small vegetable garden behind the house. Her shoulder healed gradually, and with it, her spirit began to mend as well. Hayes was true to his word about respecting her privacy. He was gone most days from dawn until dusk, working with his men or riding the boundaries of his property. When he was home, He was unfailingly polite, if somewhat reserved. They would share meals together, during which he would ask after her comfort and she would inquire about his day, but rarely did the conversation delve deeper. One evening in late June, as Liliana was preparing supper, Hayes returned earlier than usual. She turned from the stove to find him standing in the doorway, his expression troubled. "Is everything all right, Mr. Vance?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I received word in town today," he said, removing his hat. The Blackwater gang was spotted near Pine Ridge, not 30 miles from here. Liliana felt the color drain from her face. "The men who attacked the stagecoach," Hayes nodded grimly. "The very same. Sheriff thinks they might be planning something big. I've told the men to keep an eye out for strangers and to travel in pairs when they're away from the ranch." "You think they know I'm here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't say for certain, but we should assume the worst." He stepped closer, his expression softening. "I won't let anything happen to you, Mrs. Hargrove. I gave my word." For the first time since she'd met him, Liliana truly looked at Hayes Vance not as her employer or her protector, but as a man. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he spoke earnestly, as he did now. There was a scar along his jawline, thin and white with age, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. Yet there was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior. "I believe you," she said softly. Their gazes held for a moment longer than necessary before Hayes cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll be increasing patrols around the property," he said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. "And I think it would be best if you didn't go into town for a while." Liliana nodded her agreement, turning back to the stove to hide the flush that had risen to her cheeks. That night, after Hayes had retired to his room, Liliana sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. The thought of the Blackwater gang searching for her sent chills down her spine, but there was also a strange comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. Hayes and his men were vigilant, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt protected. As the weeks passed, the threat of the Blackwater gang seemed to recede. No strangers were spotted near the ranch, and the sheriff's reports indicated the gang had moved farther north. Life fell into a comfortable routine, and Liliana found herself looking forward to the quiet evenings when Hayes would return from his day's work, and they would share supper. She learned more about him during these times, how he'd grown up in Virginia, the son of a horse breeder who'd lost everything in the war. How he'd fought for the Union despite his Southern roots, believing slavery to be an abomination. How he'd come west afterward, unable to return to a home that no longer existed. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of books, and her brief but happy marriage to Thomas. "He sounds like he was a good man," Hayes said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "He was," Liliana agreed, a bittersweet smile crossing her face. "He had such grand ideas. He wanted to chronicle the growth of the West, to tell the stories of the people building new lives here." She paused, toying with the edge of her shawl. "What about you, Mr. Vance? Have you never thought of marrying?" Hayes was quiet for so long that Liliana feared she'd overstepped. Finally, he spoke. "I was engaged once before the war. Her name was Alina. We had plans to marry when I returned." His voice grew distant. "She married someone else while I was gone, someone who hadn't seen the things I'd seen, done the things I'd done." "I'm sorry," Liliana said softly. "That must have been difficult." Hayes shrugged, but she could see the old hurt in his eyes. "It was for the best. I wasn't the same man who left, and out here I've found a kind of peace I never expected." As summer turned to autumn, Liliana realized with some surprise that she was happy. The ranch had become home, and Hayes, whom she now called by his first name, at his insistence, had become a friend. She thought less and less about returning to Boston or striking out on her own. Instead, she found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. But the peace they had found was shattered one crisp October morning when one of the ranch hands came galloping up to the house, his horse lathered and his expression urgent. "Boss," he called as Hayes stepped onto the porch. "Riders coming in fast from the east. 6, maybe 7 of them. They don't look friendly." Hayes's face hardened. "Get the men together. Arm yourselves." He turned to Liliana, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Stay inside and lock the doors. There's a shotgun in my room under the bed. Get it and be ready." Liliana nodded, her heart pounding as she hurried to follow his instructions. Through the window, she watched Hayes and his men form a line in front of the house, rifles at the ready. Minutes later, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the riders approached. When they were close enough to identify, Hayes's shoulders tensed visibly. Even from a distance, Liliana recognized one of the men, the leader of the gang who had attacked the stagecoach. His face burned into her memory. "It's them," she whispered, gripping the shotgun tightly. The riders slowed as they approached the defensive line, stopping about 50 yards away. The leader, a tall man with a scar running from his eye to his chin, raised his hand in greeting. "That's far enough," Hayes called out. "State your business." "Just passing through," the scarred man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thought we might water our horses, maybe buy some supplies." "There's nothing for sale here," Hayes said firmly. "Town's 10 miles south if you're looking to buy." The scarred man's gaze swept over the ranch, lingering on the main house. "Heard you might have something more interesting than supplies. A woman, perhaps. A witness to something she shouldn't have seen." Liliana's blood ran cold. "There's no one here but me and my men," Hayes lied smoothly. "And we don't take kindly to threats." The tension in the air was palpable as the two groups faced off. Liliana held her breath, her finger hovering near the trigger of the shotgun. Now," the scarred man said, his voice deceptively casual. "No threats here, just looking for an old friend. Pretty little thing with brown hair. Last we saw her, she was bleeding something awful in a stagecoach. Thought she might not have made it, but rumors say otherwise." "I suggest you move on," Hayes replied, his voice like steel. "Whatever business you think you have here, you're mistaken." The scarred man's friendly demeanor vanished. "I don't think I am. You see, we don't leave loose ends, Mr. Vance, and that woman is a very loose end indeed." "How do you know my name?" Hayes demanded. "We make it our business to know things," the man replied with a cold smile. "Just like we know you've been harboring a witness. Now you can hand her over and we'll be on our way, or things can get unpleasant." Hayes raised his rifle slightly. "You're outnumbered." "For now," the man agreed, "but we'll be back. And next time we won't be asking so nicely." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day, Mr. Vance." With that, the riders turned and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. As soon as they were out of sight, Hayes hurried into the house. Liliana met him in the parlor, the shotgun still clutched in her trembling hands. "They know I'm here," she said, her voice barely audible. Hayes gently took the shotgun from her and set it aside. "They suspect, but they don't know for certain." He ran a hand through his hair, his expression grave. "But they'll be back, and with more men. What do we do?" Hayes's jaw set determinedly. "We prepare, and when they come, we'll be ready." The next few days were a flurry of activity as the ranch was transformed into a fortress. Additional men were hired from neighboring ranches, the house was reinforced, and lookouts were posted around the clock. Hayes insisted that Liliana learn to shoot, spending hours with her at a makeshift firing range until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "I never thought I'd be handling firearms," she admitted as she reloaded the revolver he'd given her. "My mother would be scandalized." Hayes smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "You're a natural. Must be all that typesetting steady hands." Liliana returned his smile, grateful for the moment of levity. As they worked together to prepare for the impending attack, something shifted between them. The danger had stripped away pretense, leaving only honest emotion in its wake. One evening, as they pored over a map of the ranch, plotting defensive positions, Liliana found herself standing closer to Hayes than propriety would allow. When she looked up, she found his eyes on her, filled with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Liliana," he said softly, her name on his lips sounding like a prayer. "If anything happens, don't," she interrupted, placing her hand over his. "Nothing will happen. You promised to keep me safe, remember?" Hayes turned his hand to clasp hers. "And I will, with my life if necessary." "That's what I'm afraid of," she whispered. "I've already lost one man who tried to protect me. I couldn't bear to lose another." The admission hung in the air between them, revealing feelings neither had dared acknowledge until now. Hayes reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I never expected to feel this way again," he confessed. "After Alina, I thought that part of me was dead. And now," Liliana asked, her heart racing, "now I find myself thinking about a future I had given up on." His voice was rough with emotion. "A future with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Liliana's eyes. "Hayes." The moment was shattered by the sound of a warning shot from one of the lookouts. Hayes instantly shifted back into the role of protector, pulling Liliana away from the window. "They're here," he said grimly. "Earlier than I expected." Through the gathering darkness, they could see the glow of torches approaching from multiple directions. The Blackwater gang had returned as promised, and they had brought reinforcements. "Get to the cellar," Hayes ordered, checking his revolver. "There's a hidden exit that leads to the creek bed. If things go badly, use it." Liliana shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you, Liliana, no," she insisted, picking up the shotgun. "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. This is my home now, too, and I'll defend it alongside you." Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run. That's non-negotiable." Outside, the ranch hands had taken up defensive positions around the property. The approaching riders, at least 20 strong, formed a loose circle around the ranch house. "Vance," the scarred leader called out. "Last chance to hand over the woman." Hayes stepped onto the porch, Liliana a step behind him. "And if I refuse," the leader grinned savagely, "then we burn this place to the ground and kill everyone in it." "You're welcome to try," Hayes replied evenly. "But I should warn you, my men are the best shots in the territory, and they've got you in their sights right now." As if to emphasize his point, several of the ranch hands fired warning shots into the air. The leader's confidence wavered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "You're outnumbered, Vance, and we've got nothing to lose." "That makes two of us," Hayes said, then in a voice that carried across the yard, "Now." At his signal, lanterns were uncovered all around the property, illuminating the scene and revealing more armed men positioned strategically around the perimeter, far more than the gang had anticipated. The leader's eyes widened as he realized they had ridden into a trap. I've been expecting you," Hayes explained calmly. "So I called in some favors. Those men aren't just ranch hands. They're every able-bodied man from town who's sick of your gang terrorizing honest folk." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the gang members panicked and fired a shot, which went wide. The ranch erupted into chaos as gunfire exploded from all directions. Hayes pushed Liliana back into the house, taking cover beside her at a window. "Stay down," he ordered, returning fire at the riders who were now scattering for cover. The battle was fierce but brief. Caught in the open and surrounded, most of the gang members surrendered quickly. A few tried to flee but were cut down or captured by men positioned in the surrounding hills. The scarred leader, however, was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Liliana asked as the gunfire died down. Hayes scanned the yard, his expression tense. "I don't know. Stay here while I check with the men." As he stepped onto the porch, a shot rang out from the side of the house. Hayes staggered, clutching his arm as the scarred leader emerged from the shadows, revolver trained on him. "Should have minded your own business, Vance," the man snarled, advancing slowly. Without thinking, Liliana raised the shotgun and fired. The blast caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before he could recover, Hayes drew his revolver with his uninjured arm and fired twice, striking the man in the chest. The leader collapsed, his gun falling from his lifeless fingers. For several seconds, Liliana couldn't move, the smoking shotgun still clutched in her hands. Then Hayes was beside her, gently taking the weapon. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You're hurt." Hayes glanced at his arm, where blood was seeping through his shirt. "It's just a graze. I've had worse." The aftermath of the battle was a blur of activity. The sheriff arrived with more men from town, taking the surviving gang members into custody. A doctor was summoned to tend to the wounded, including Hayes, whose injury was indeed minor but required stitches. It was nearly dawn before the ranch was quiet again. Exhausted but unable to sleep, Liliana sat on the porch, watching the sunrise. Hayes joined her a short time later, his arm bandaged and in a sling. "You should be resting," she chided gently. "So should you," he countered, easing himself onto the bench beside her. "It's been a long night." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first rays of sunlight transformed the landscape. "What happens now?" Liliana finally asked. Hayes turned to look at her, his expression serious. "That depends on you. The gang is finished. You're free to go wherever you wish, do whatever you want. The danger has passed." Liliana met his gaze steadily. "And what if I wish to stay?" Hope flickered in Hayes's eyes. "Then you would make me the happiest man in Wyoming territory." He reached for her hand with his uninjured one. "I meant what I said before we were interrupted. I've come to care for you deeply, Liliana, more than I thought possible." "I feel the same," she admitted, her heart full. "When I came here, I was broken, grieving. I never expected to find love again." "Is that what this is?" Hayes asked softly. "Love?" Liliana smiled, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "Yes, I believe it is." Hayes leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a gentle, tender kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Spring came early to Wyoming territory in 1877, bringing with it new beginnings and second chances. The Vance Ranch was a hive of activity as preparations were made for the upcoming wedding. Hayes and Liliana had decided to wait until the thaw, giving her time to properly complete her mourning period for Thomas, and allowing them to invite guests from neighboring towns. On a perfect April morning, with wildflowers blooming across the valley, they exchanged vows beneath an arch of intertwined branches on the very spot where they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. The ranch hands stood as witnesses, alongside friends from town, and even a few of Liliana's relatives who had made the journey from Boston. Their initial skepticism about her new life giving way to approval when they saw the happiness in her eyes. "I never thought I'd find this kind of joy again," Liliana confessed to Hayes as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "When Thomas died, I believed my chance at happiness died with him." Hayes held her close, his eyes reflecting the depth of his love. "He gave you a second chance when he saved you, and in saving you, he gave me a second chance too." He brushed a kiss against her forehead. "I'll never stop being grateful to him for that." The celebration continued well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. As the festivities wound down, Hayes found Liliana standing alone at the edge of the gathering, gazing up at the stars. "Mrs. Vance," he said, savoring the sound of her new name. "May I escort you home?" Liliana smiled, taking his offered arm. "You may, Mr. Vance." As they walked toward the house, their home, Hayes spoke the words that had brought them together months before, now imbued with new meaning. "I promised to keep you safe for him, but now I promise to keep you safe for us, for our future together." Liliana leaned against his shoulder, content beyond measure. "Our future," she echoed. "I like the sound of that." In the years that followed, the Vance Ranch prospered, expanding its boundaries and its operations. Hayes's reputation as a fair and honest businessman grew throughout the territory, while Liliana found her own calling. Remembering Thomas's dream, she established a small newspaper, the Copper Creek Chronicle, which became known for its thoughtful reporting on life in the growing West. Their family grew as well. 2 years after their wedding, Liliana gave birth to twins, a boy they named Thomas, in honor of the man whose sacrifice had brought them together, and a girl they called Hope, for what they had found in each other. 2 more children followed in the years after. A daughter, Eleanor, named in a gesture of healing for Hayes's past, and a son, William, named for Liliana's father. The dangers they had faced together in those early days became stories told around the fire, reminders of the precious fragility of life and the strength found in facing adversity together. The Blackwater Gang faded into memory, its members either dead or imprisoned. A dark chapter closed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes surprised Liliana with a special gift, a small, bound book containing letters he had been writing to her throughout their marriage, chronicling their life together and his enduring love for her. "You once told me about Thomas's desire to tell the stories of the West," he explained as she turned the pages with trembling fingers. "I thought our story deserved to be told too." Tears filled Liliana's eyes as she read his words, his heart laid bare on the pages. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The most precious gift I've ever received." Hayes took her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed there a decade earlier. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through. "Staying here, building a life with me instead of returning to civilization." Liliana cupped his face in her hands, her expression earnest. "Never, not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be, where we were meant to be." She gestured toward their sleeping children, curled together on a blanket nearby. "This is our civilization, Hayes, our legacy." As twilight deepened into night, they sat together on the porch of the home they had defended and filled with love, watching as the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. The journey that had brought them together had been marked by tragedy and loss, but also by courage, honor, and ultimately, a love strong enough to heal broken hearts and forge a future neither had dared to dream possible. "He died saving me," Liliana murmured, echoing words spoken long ago. "And in doing so, he saved us both." Hayes drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I'll keep you safe until my dying day," he promised. "You and our children and the life we've built together." In the soft glow of the lantern light, with the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them, they shared a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first and all the certainty of their years together, a kiss that promised many more years to come, filled with the same love, trust, and devotion that had seen them through the darkest of times into the light of their shared future. And as the stars continued their eternal dance across the heavens, two souls who had found each other against all odds took comfort in the knowledge that some loves are powerful enough to transcend even death, creating new beginnings from endings and weaving together the threads of past, present, and future into the beautiful tapestry of a life fully lived and deeply loved.